So today, yes, is all about the Subgrade Model Manager, and yes, I will be working on Civil 3D on the Civil 3D platform. However, this is very much a completely platform neutral webinar. There is nothing in here other than one final act where I export a Civil 3D surface, which will require you to know anything about either platform or any of the platforms we operate on. So Subgrade Model Manager was introduced in, yes, 23.1, which came out in December. It's not a popular time for people to download software, but then nevertheless, that's when it came out. And it was then added and incorporated into Toolspace. So if you haven't heard of Toolspace, I don't know what's going on with Toolspace, we did a webinar a couple of weeks back to show you the new features of V24. And just so happens that subgrade models can be created and accessed through this particular form or through Toolspace. And really, the development of the Subgrade Model Manager was based on customer feedback. We do a lot of really good modeling with Civil Site Design through things like auto model and built models. But really, the nub of it was that many of you are requiring surfaces for the purposes of things like bulk earthworks, and this is what we've developed based on that that feedback. And yes, as I've said, there operates with any model. So what you're just about to see is actually a combination of roads and car park. And the nice thing is this is going to be in a model viewer environment. So not the model viewer, okay? We're not doing this through model viewer, but it's an environment that is basically the same, but with editing features. Skip forward a slide. There we go. Now, if you weren't aware, it was a job to know where to put this slide, but if you weren't aware, we actually have a subgrade modeling playlist, which was created with 23.1. I've put the QR code there. I've started putting them on the webinars. It just seems a much easier way to give people the links. And you can basically go ahead and look at quite an extensive playlist, which covers everything about subgrade modeling in Civil Site Design, not just the Subgrade Model Manager. You can actually see at the top there, there's a subgrade variation editor video that was also released in 23.1. But so anything sort of related in that area, you can go and have a look in more depth outside of this webinar, which really leads me onto this slide conveniently, which is really how it works. And basically all that's going to happen is that the Subgrade Model Manager looks for the bottom layer of subgrade on all your strings. Okay, this could be multiple different strings from different parts of your design, and basically connects them together. So what you're seeing in that first cross-section preview is what the software will inevitably be looking at and try and basically connect. And I say try, it will connect with a subgrade surface or a single surface. And you can see everything in blue is everything that it's basically ignoring. But the great thing about this is, you shall see shortly, it's all very well me trying to sort of describe what this product does. It's far easier to show you in practice rather than giving you screenshots of all bits and pieces. But you've got user control over everything that happens in this environment, as you'll see soon. Which leads me on to what we're doing today. So today we're looking at a combined, this is a model builder model. It's a combination of a road design, bit of road widening, curb and footpath, etc. And then we've got a car park profile strings with a dish and an island, fairly straightforward stuff, but quite an eclectic mix of string types. So what we wanted to do was kind of really show you how this type of model can be applied in the Subgrade Model Manager. Okay, it could have been that we just done a single road, but let's face it, we don't all stick to just single roads, and we are using Model Builder, so it's worth showing you more in depth of how the Subgrade Model Manager can actually work. So the agenda today is that I'm going to create a brand new model for this particular road and the car park. We'll have a look at the navigation and display functionality. The reason I showed you that playlist earlier was so that if you, for whatever reason, want some more information in more depth, particularly around some of this display stuff, which I'm not going to hang around on too much, those videos will help you unpack that in a bit more detail. We're going to look at the emission tools or emit tools, so that when we do actually get this model being created, we can adjust what layers of subgrade we display and those that we don't. We'll apply something called a surface resolve, which is effectively like a batter. It's all very well having a subgrade surface, but how do you reconnect that subgrade surface up to, for example, the natural, or maybe up to the design? So we're going to be looking at the surface resolve tool and the user breakline tool, where you can pretty much just add in your own linear breakline into the design. We'll also look at the split function, which allows you to break a string and tell it to do something else. for example, have no surface resolve, or for example, have a completely different change in subgrade along the sections, then just before the end, we'll change the template, because let's face it, we all do that, and show you the consequences of changing the template or the subgrade on the template, so you can learn what happens and then how you recompute the model. And lastly, we'll export, just for fun, we'll export an IFC file, and for the Civil 3D users, a Civil 3D surface, which if you already know how to use Civil Site Design and you know how to do that, then that will be run of the mill. So I've got Model Viewer fired up already. As I've already sort of explained, we've sort of got this generic road design. I've got a little surface extend here to tie in my car park. The car park really is not designed in any way, shape or form. Quite right. I'm just literally just creating this for the purposes of the model. Got the island and got the dish. So what we'll do is we'll start off by just closing down Model Viewer. And if you haven't got 24 on your computer, which some of you don't, then you'll need to head to the Roads tab, Auto Model pull down. Okay, Subgrade Model Manager is found in there. Subgrade models. We're going to right click and go Subgrade Model Manager instead of clicking on that button on Auto Model, but it's going to send us to the same place. The environment that pops up, as I said, is very similar to Model Viewer. Okay, the first thing you would do is go ahead and create a brand new sub model. Now in here, we're going to call this Roads with Parking. And you've got the option of a description in here as well. You're then prompted to pick a model. So if you're using Total Model, you can use this just simply on Total Model and obtain a subgrade surface. Or in my case, I'm going to be using my built model, which I've created. The sampled surface is basically what surface it will use to promote or display the existing surface up here. So that's basically what it'd be using. So by and large, most people would be picking the NS in this particular instance, or a surface that you'd be using for the sampling of your roads, that type of thing. The section style is quite complicated to sort of discuss at this particular juncture, but suffice to say, if you are using this for the first time, this is controlling what codes from your templates are being used for the basis of the bottom of your design. Okay, and there are different options in here for different types of templates that you may or may not be using. Having spoken to some users about this and that are operating it, they have actually found they haven't used any of these, and the default datum, which essentially looks for the bottom layer of subgrade on your templates, does the job perfectly fine, and they haven't had to venture into section styles. The section filter rate, I'm not going to be talking about, but basically, if there's some very, very tight sampling, then it'll actually weed some of that out. The grading, include grading strings. Don't forget, if you've used grading strings inherently are always drawn in Total Model. Okay, so what you may find is that you've got roads being created and whatnot, and you go, well, actually, I want a subgrade surface, but I don't want those grading strings that are for a basin or a car park, whatever it happens to be. I don't want them included, so you can uncheck that box. In this case, I have no grading strings. I'm using profile strings, so we can leave that as it is. We're going to leave the rest of the settings on, because I'm going to be talking about the boundary retraction in a second. All we're going to do is click OK. And this is, again, this is completely out of the box, so this is what we would be getting with this built model without me actually doing anything on it. This is the Subgrade Model Manager environment. Now I'm going to just show you just one of the things with this subgrade model, which we kind of have to go back to kind of bookend how this model's been created. Model properties takes you back to the same form you were in a second ago with some slight key differences. You can't change the base model and you can't change the sampled surface. You'd need to create another model to do that. What you can do is delete the submodel. This will not delete the Civil Site Design surface that is being created in the background from Surface Manager. So we won't delete it, but the model which generates that surface will be. Okay, so that's where you get rid of your model. There's no other place, there's no point going to Surface Manager, deleting the surface. Your model will still exist. Boundary retraction is something that was added in and actually is included in Model Builder now, which is a clever little algorithm which attempts to remove triangles from the outside in to your design. Without you having to go through and apply boundaries and deleting. If I apply this and click OK, we'll actually get a good wedge of those triangles removed. Notice how those ones have stayed though, and that's more than 15 meters, which is quite smart. Now, if we go back to model properties, I then decide, well, look, okay, let's get rid of everything around 10, click OK. We should find, because we're around the extents of our model here, yep, too many have gone. Let's go back to model properties. make that 11. So that immediately cleans the model up before actually having to do anything. So you'll notice I'm navigating around in here, and if you're familiar with Model Viewer, great. If you're not, then I'm using my mouse wheel, just holding that down to orbit and scrolling in and out to scrolling my mouse wheel to zoom in and out even. Now, one thing you'll notice is different here is where my mouse would normally just have a hand in Model Viewer, I've actually got a picker tool. And this basically means I can start to click on things and pick things in the drawing. Because of that, the pan functionality is not on the left mouse click. It's actually holding down Control on your keyboard and then holding down the mouse wheel, and that gives you the pan. Now, if you do find yourself attracted to this button here, that's fine. You can use the pan, you can orbit, and you can operate with your left mouse button, but you won't have the picker tool. So click on the Home tab, and that reinitiates the picker tool, which means that you can then begin to select objects, which is the whole point of this environment, is to be able to select things and turn things on and off. So let's have a quick look at what's going on the ribbon. Okay, so we've got the styles. Again, these are just typical styles. We've just sort of put all the same styles that are in here from Model Viewer. So if you do want rendered, and I'm just going to ask Todd, I was going to leave rendered with edges on here. I'm just conscious of how that looks when it gets streamed to the audience. Is the rendered with edges too much?
It's a bit faded, so the orange lines are kind of disappearing, I think, in the way it renders. Right. So maybe turn them off. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'll turn them off.
Maybe just leave it as rendered, unless it's a solid shape.
The reason why I personally like rendered with edges is because it shows me how everything's connected up. But for the purposes of the webinar only, we'll leave it at rendered, but you can go through and change that. Next, we have the display items. So this is really cool. So some of the stuff you can do in here is very smart. So we've got regions. Now, region is basically saying basically saying, show me the subgrade which is being used for the basis of my subgrade surface. Okay. Now, if we check omitted regions, this is all of the subgrade on your templates, which is not being used for the purposes of your subgrade surface. With those two things checked on, it looks like I've got my full template being applied. Okay. But what we tend to find is that as you're operating this, I don't really care about these two top layers of subgrade. Okay, they're not really relevant, nor is that curb, not really relevant to my design. I'm interested in what's going on at the bottom. So we just say, well, look, they're classed as omitted. We uncheck that box and we won't see them anymore. And they're gone. So I actually like to operate this with omitted regions turned off and only turn them on where we're making adjustments to template subgrade and we actually need to see them again. Next, we've got sectional breaklines and linear breaklines. So sectional breaklines are essentially connecting the codes on your cross-section of your string where you have sample positions. However, there is a slight caveat here. There are a lot of extra section samples that get added in that are not part of your standard section sampling. And this is basically called VC, or vertical curve mesh refinement. So what you may have noticed is when you operate Civil Site Design and you turn on, as we're going to do just here, is that subgrade surface? Let's just hover over that. Yeah, so the subgrade surface got created automatically there, so that's all good. Let's turn on the triangles. You'll notice in here that we've got a lot of extra sampling going on. And that's basically because the software, every single meter, will undertake an extra sample for you in the background, okay, to ensure that you get the geometry and the curvature of a vertical curve. Okay, so my section sampling is actually every 10 meters, but I'm getting all these extras. We've employed the same thing in the Subgrade Model Manager. Otherwise, what you'll end up with is obviously a very disjointed looking surface underneath, and it's not really respecting the fact you may have vertical curves. So there's a lot of extras. Now, the section break lines are the break line which controls the section of the surface. So if I left click on this orange line here, as soon as I do that, I'm provided with the sectional break line form over to the left hand side. We'll close that down and look at that very shortly. Then we've got linear break lines. So linear break lines are following along the string. So for example, if we go to behind the back of the curve here, the back of the curve subgrade, these are connecting all of those together. Okay, and you can see here we've got linear break line. The great thing is what we've done is we've allowed you to pretty much tell the software whether or not the sectional break line or the linear break line should be on or off. Okay, which is why we've then got, and I'm going to close down the linear breakline editor, emitted breaklines. They might seem like a lot, but actually, as you operate this, you'll find that you just don't have these things turned on. So this is showing you everything that's not part of my subgrade model. And I can actually go in and select, for example, there's another layer of subgrade here, which happens to be part of my road, which is not part of my subgrade model, and that happens to be emitted, which is why we'll talk about emissions, so to speak, emitting even a little bit later on. So the emitted break lines we're going to turn off for the time being for clarity, and the last thing we're going to do, or not the last thing, but the next thing we're going to do is turn on the surfaces. So we've got the design surface, which gives you the actual real cross-section of your string, and the existing surface, which is again taking the same sampling of the surface. So it doesn't really work all that well when you've got model builder models, because obviously I'm seeing the real road cross-section with a curb going through here. But actually, for context on things like a rural road, which I've seen this used on a few kilometers, it's very helpful to kind of get some perspective on where the surfaces are in relationship to your subgrade model. The subgrade surface you probably saw earlier, I turned that on and off. So that's basically, it gets created automatically. In fact, you can see there we've got build surface checked on, and we already had the build surface option in the model properties, but we can turn that on and off. That's actually kind of handy, particularly if you add a new layer of subgrade like we're going to do below the layer that's currently there, and we want to model to it. It's kind of handy to turn off the surface display. The labels, I'm just going to check all these on. I would recommend probably that you don't turn these on all the time. There's a lot of graphical information that is getting displayed. If I zoom in here, it's actually showing you the depths of the subgrade, which you would normally, you can actually see these on the cross-section window in the view settings if you're not aware of this. But these are added in, as were chainages. Okay, so if you're into that kind of thing, you want to see the chainages, you can do, but it's kind of hit or miss as to whether or not they offer huge value, but you can turn them on. I would suggest turn them off unless you need them. The more things you have turned on, the more sort of process hungry your model is going to be, all right, which leads me on to dynamic update. If you're going to make lots and lots of changes and you've got a very, very big model, have a play around having dynamic update turned off. Okay, and even the build surface. Build surface is one of those things you kind of probably do want turned on. You do want to see the surface update, but dynamic update, basically having that turned off, will give you a little bit of extra processing power. Last thing we're going to look at is display manager. I'm whittling through these just because the fact that, again, we've got the YouTube videos which sort of unpack these in a bit more depth, and to be honest with you, they're very, very straightforward. This is really just some of the overview settings. So the background color is gray. If I select something, again, you may have noticed that it goes pink. Okay, don't change that to orange. I think we did have orange in one of the first iterations, which wasn't that helpful because the line's already orange. Things like the existing surface style, you saw that existing surface style was green. Well, we have a line style in here called existing surface. If I pop to line styles, you'll see here that when we go pop to existing surface, that line work that you saw there is using a line pattern called existing surface, a very narrow or sort of spidery line weight, a green color, and there's the line pattern up here, which we could control how the existing surface was displayed. So it's fairly straightforward stuff. You can create your own. Pen down means it's drawing, pen up means after that one, it's basically going to leave a gap of 0.05. Straight, as I said, very straightforward. Same goes with things like the text styles as well that you can see displayed on the labeling if you're interested in changing those. The critical one I would say is the materials, because at the end of the day, your materials list will be very different to our materials list. And what I suggest you do is when you run this is add materials from model. And what this will do is it will scour through your materials you're using the template editor and dump those into this form. And then what you can then do, as you'll have noticed here, for example, there's my my curb subgrade there. That's using FCR class 3, and it uses a material style called sand. And that material style comes from the material groups. So if you've used Model Viewer, you'll be fully aware how these material groups work, and you can assign your own material group and edit the material groups in this list. And these come from your common 10. One final part of this particular, so this basically goes on to really where the subgrade surface style is shown, and that's using topsoil. So the reason why you can see topsoil there is because I'm using the topsoil surface style. So fairly standard stuff, not something we're going to be spending too much time on. Really, the nub of this is to get into what we can do with the Subgrade Model Manager in respect of layers. So we're going to have a look at the road. We've got so many different spots we could have a look at, but we'll probably do most of the work kind of on the road string, because once you've applied the rule to a string, you apply it to anything. It's the same thing. So the style has automatically gone in and looked for the bottom surface of Subgrade on my design. And what I've got here is a sectional break line, which I'm going to left click on. What you'll notice here in the sectional break line form is that it tells you the chainage. It'll then tell you the two codes which connect this sectional break line, and importantly, the layer index. So when I've created this road, and in actual fact, what I'll do is just come over here, come over to templates and just show you the road. I think it will open up. Oops, no, wrong one. Oops, let's try that again. Right clicking edit template. So if you haven't used tool space, it jumps you straight to the template. If we go edit section. So there's our layers. There's layer 3, which is 0.2 of Crossrock class 3. Okay, so that's layer index 3, which relates back to this. Okay, just so we know what's going on. Later on, we'll add another layer. Show you how you can make changes. It's then telling me if it's the bottom or not, which it is, it's true. And then crucially, we'll ignore create split. It's saying omit the top. Yes, omit the top of that layer, because I don't want to basically design to it. I don't want it to be modeled, and leave the bottom. Okay, so at the moment, all I'm going to do is say, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. But actually what I want to do is to have that bottom layer removed, and I actually want layer 2 to be my bottom layer of Subgrade. So this is where we pull over the omitted break lines. Okay, and then in fact, we'll turn on omitted regions as well. We might as well. So what I'm seeing here is everything going on. Now, what I decide to do is that I want to get rid of this bottom layer. So I click on the sectional break line, and for layer 3, I'm going to say omit bottom. So omit the bottom of layer 3, and I've got a choice. I can either apply it just to this single section, or I can apply it over a range, i.e. the whole thing. So for the moment, I'll just do apply to section only so you can see. Apply to section. Right, now nothing's happening because there's nothing for it to model to here now. There's no layers that are being added to this. And in fact, if we turn off the omitted regions, you can actually see it's completely gone. So there's nothing for it to model to. Let's turn the omitted regions back on. Just again, this is a visual thing. Turning them on and off makes no difference to this working, okay? The omitted break lines does need to be turned on because I need to pick the omitted break line, which will be there. If I left click, there we go. I need to be able to pick it. And you can see that says, here we go, layer 2. That's the one I'm after. Do I want to omit the top of layer 2? Yeah, don't need it. Do I want to omit the bottom of layer 2? Oh, no, I don't. I actually want to make sure the bottom of layer 2 is now being modeled. Apply to section. And as we do that, let's just have a quick squiz around here. Notice how, and if we go underneath, you'll actually see, okay, we'll turn off the omitted regions because they're not being used, so it's clarity here. Now, I'm modeling just on that one section to that layer of Subgrade instead of the other layer. So which obviously, you know, from modeling perspective isn't great, but it's doing exactly what I want. Now I decide, well, actually, no, that isn't correct. I want to put the original layer back in again. All right, so this time, in fact, we can actually see it underneath, but this time we're going to basically say to layer 2, you're going to be omitted. Apply to section, and it's completely gone. So this is where omitted break lines is very handy because I've got nothing to pick. I know that this, as you can see here, is layer 3, and at the moment the bottom is omitted. So let's uncheck that and apply to section. And hey presto, it comes back in again. Now, really, that is how the omitting works. You could apply to range. I could have done this whole thing in one hit. So if for whatever reason you start this up and you go, do you know what? And I did have this discussion with a customer who's doing a rural road. They actually said the bottom layer of Subgrade was part of a different sort of stage of works. It wasn't relevant. So they, although it was in the template, they actually wanted the second layer, as it were, to be the base of the Subgrade surface. So they simply used this tool. Didn't matter about styles and settings, etc. They just simply went in, told it to omit, applied over range, and just continued on. Now, we'll have a look at, I was going to do the whole thing by range, but I'm not going to. We'll have a look at, really, what we're showing you here is sectional break line editing. Other than the split, okay, this is how sectional break lines work. If I was to go ahead and click on the linear break line over here, we get a slightly different setup. In fact, what we might do is head over to the dish, whoops, without making you all sick. So at the moment, when we left click on this particular linear break line, okay, what's happening is that the software is telling us the code. So RDH for dish also tells you what it's connected to, which happens to be the LDH, which is the opposite side. We can omit this linear break line and click apply. Okay, and then what will happen is not much, basically because the software is still triangulating to the sectional break line. So if I didn't want the bottom of this dish to be triangulated either, I could just do what I just did a second ago, which is to left click, omit the bottom, apply over range, and all that will get modeled is this linear break line on the other side. Now, what if we want to add, we'll put that one uncheck omitted and click apply. Now, what if we want to add a linear break line back in? So let's just say we want to box this sort of this dish. Well, what we can do, and by the way, just in case you spot it, you'll notice that there's two lines. Okay, in a lot of cases, there are two lines, which might seem odd considering this is just a straightforward little template. In fact, just to show you what this looks like, when you right click on a sectional break line you've selected, you can actually open up a display and display a cross section. Really handy feature. Notice how there's not two lines there. There's no extra codes or anything like that. Well, there is an extra code. I should say it's sort of sneakily hidden in there. But inevitably, when you're modeling something that has a vertical face on it, much the same way as if you were creating a template, okay, what we don't recommend you do is have basically a code on directly above another code. Otherwise, how's the software going to know to triangulate to that point there or that point there? So what we do is we add an extra line, very, very tiny little spot. In fact, you can sort of see there's sort of looks like there's doubling up going on, but it's nothing to affect the model. We add an extra line in there to ensure that the model is always modeling correctly, to ensure that you never have basically triangles on top of triangles. The software trying to do that, it doesn't work. So in this case, I'm going to pop over to this particular linear break line, and you can see it's currently omitted. We're going to uncheck omitted and apply. And I think I've just grabbed the wrong one there, so I'm going to check omitted. Now, because there is actually two codes here, I've just picked the wrong one. So I'm going to grab the one on the outside. There we go, which is omitted. This is the great thing. You can just quickly just cherry pick the ones. There we go. I'm now getting that boxing going on around my curve, and I'll do the same on the other side. You can see it's omitted. We're going to uncheck that and apply. And now I've got my linear break line being added in. So linear break lines, we'll talk about the resolving and the user break lines. So we've already covered off sectional break lines and linear break lines and how they work and what they're intended to do, and how you can add and adjust layers of subgrade. So again, another example is this. There's our curb. We may decide, sorry, our footpath. We may decide that that boxing is totally unnecessary. We want to omit that particular bit of line work from the model, click omit and apply. What we tend to do, what we've done with this, and in fact, I need to go in and pick another one. I think there's just two very close together in there. So we might just see if we can grab it. Don't think we're going to be able to get it, are we? No.
It's just sectional break lines.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yep, omit top is on. So there you go. Right, I've tripped myself up and inadvertently educated you at the same time. So and I've totally forgotten about this because I haven't done it on the dish yet. We've done it on this one. So on the footpath, the top sectional break line is being applied. If I go omit top and apply over range from 0 to 1,000, thank you, Todd. There we go. Now I can add that linear break line back in, by the way. I can unomit that and it will still draw it. There we go, and apply. Then it comes back. But just so happens, so just be aware, as I should have said to myself before doing this webinar, that yes, you can omit linear break lines, but still be impacted by the sectional break lines. But it's so easy just to pick up and have a go and go, right, okay, yeah, so that's not being omitted, whereas it should be. He says, right, we're going to have a look at what's known as surface resolve, and in combination, look at linear break lines. User linear break lines. Now there is a surface resolve going on here. I'll explain what that is in a second. Let's just fire up a cross section of the road by right-clicking display cross section. And in here, in the cross section window, we're going to go display display our other objects, and display a surface. So what we've got in here at the moment is a surface which automatically gets prefixed with SUB. Subgrade surfaces are all SUB and they appear as subgrade surfaces in tool space. Click OK. Now, the subgrade surface is matching onto the subgrade, which is why we can only see it when it comes out behind the curb. You can see there's a slight taper on that deliberately, otherwise it wouldn't model properly. Now, why is it not modeling between this point of my subgrade and this point of my subgrade? Okay, well, we've incorporated automatically, when it finds a back of curb code, it will automatically apply this little batter up to the design surface. So let's see how this works. The surface resolve itself can't be selected. Okay, if I left click on it, nothing happens. And I'll show you how you find it in a minute. But I know that that resolve has come from this, it only comes from a linear break line. Okay. When we click on that linear break line, there's the LBK code. You can see that, yes, it's being drawn. And in addition, there is a resolve happening. So think of this as a batter. So the batter is battering at 1000% up to the design surface. Okay, we're not going to the NS, which is why that cross section, which I foolishly shut down. I think I nearly opened up the vertical grading editor there. That would have been a bit trigger happy. So if you wanted to, you can resolve to the NS, but obviously for the purposes of this model, that would be a bit ridiculous because I'd be resolving up to the NS and then the software would be modeling back down to the edge of the footpath here. So the resolve happens automatically, but if you don't want the resolve to happen, we left click on the linear break line, we can just uncheck resolve to surface and click apply. And that disappears. Okay, and we're just getting triangulation now between those 2 points, which we spoke about a second ago. We'll put the resolve back on and apply. And we're back to where we were before. Now, the great thing is you can put resolves everywhere. You can put resolve on the edge of the design, which is what I'm going to do here. Whoops. Just going a little bit trigger happy there with the scroll. I'm going to turn off the omitted break lines. Just don't need to see these. Now, I'm going to show you this because this will not perform quite as expected. When you put a resolve on, the software looks for a code and goes, oh, that's on the left side. I should be resolving in that direction or battering out to the left or to the right. Whereas if you work with the centerline of a string, you kind of get a different thing happening. So I'm going to put a resolve straight on the edge here. Okay, I'm going to go resolve to surface. I'm not going to resolve to total model. There is no total model. Okay, and if there is nothing to resolve to, you won't see any resolve happening. We go in here and pick the NS and apply. What we should see is the resolve going the wrong way. And because of that, it's then modeling from the resolve, skipping over the head, over the top of the sectional break lines and going back down. So how do we resolve this? Resolve to surface is going to get unchecked. We're going to apply that. Okay, I don't want the resolve. What we can do is we can add a user break line. Now, user break lines are really powerful. So what they mean is you can add extra parts to your design outside of the extent of the model. Let's click on user break lines for this particular linear break line. Again, you can put these anywhere. I'm just simply going to use the default add user break line. It will create a code for me. I don't have to put the code in. You can do if you want. I'm going to say fixed value of 1% with a fixed offset of, and just bear in mind, this is where offsetting left would need a minus value, offsetting right would need a positive value. I'm going to the right, so I'm going to put a positive value, and we're going to make that 0.1 and click OK. There we go. Now, I've actually extended my subgrade model, and there's my subgrade surface. The great thing is, this is a linear break line, which I can apply a surface resolve to. It knows it's on the right. I can go resolve to surface. Yes, please. NS, cut and fill and apply. There you go. So you can add these just as additional sort of widenings, local widenings that you need to do to your subgrade surface, because let's face it, when the contractor goes out there and he was to hypothetically dig this out, he's not going to dig a nice, neat, straight line along the center line unless you've got some immaculate contractor that's going to be working that way. But this user break line you can add, gives yourself a little bit of a margin, and then you can apply a surface resolve. Now, the question around the surface resolve is, well, hang on a second, I don't want a surface resolve all the way through. And there's two ways that you can manage this. The first one is to have a linear break line. If I go back to user break lines here, whoops, that's I should stress what I've just tried to do there is add a user break line to a user break line, which you can do. I'm going to go back to the original linear break line, go user break lines. And in here, there was an option for chainage range. Okay. So if you do want to add a resolve through a chainage range, you can attach it to a user break line and say, well, look, just through this particular chainage range, I'm going to have a particular user break line applied and then resolve off that. And you can have multiple, as you can see there. I'm going to click OK. The other way that you can do this is to apply what's known as a split. But before we do that, I'm just going to make mention of a feature in here, which because you can't left click on a user break line, knowing its parent, which you can do with things like user break lines. Notice how it tells you its parent, tells you where it's come from. So if you head to the tools option up here, you can see the linear break line editor, and this is as much a report as it is a kind of an editing tool. So on Eyelet Street, I'd like to see surface resolves and see which are true. And interestingly, I think the way, let me just run that again. Let's go linear break. I think I did the order in which I did that wasn't, let's go true. Yeah, there we go. Interesting. So the way in which I just did that didn't yield any results, but that's something we'll probably look to fix. So what this will do is it will show me all surface resolves. Okay, and it'll actually zoom to that particular resolve. So this is the one over here. The new one I've just created is there, so I can actually see it. And if I don't want it to resolve anymore, I can say surface resolve on off, and that will disappear from the list. If we turn it off, it's gone. Click close. Whoops, there's the thumbnail for my template editor from Toolspace. So I'm now, if I head back to this, you can see the resolve has now disappeared. Okay, so that's the linear break line editor. It's got some other reporting tools in there which are kind of helpful to be able to see. The other option for determining where things are going to be happening, particularly linearly, is to create what's known as a split. So let's just say, hypothetically, at this particular sectional break line, I want to stop the user break line, and I want to apply something else. If you click on Create Split and apply to section, what that will do is it removes, trying to get this around so you can actually see it, it removes that linear break line. So now, and you can see the linear break line has been completely split. So I can now choose to do something completely different on this side as opposed to this side. If I want to remove the split, I just click the button, uncheck Create Split, and apply to section, and then we're back to where we were before. Okay, so it's a really, really good little feature. Just a quick mention, because it happens on this job, and I wanted to show you guys how what can happen. If it can't resolve, you will see that it won't resolve, and basically there's no resolve. Okay, so it can't, for whatever reason, at this particular sample position, resolve to the design, and that's due to the oblique nature of the alignment and the way it's doing the offset calculation. If that happens, okay, the way to fix this, attempt to say resolve there again, is to use the insert section. So I'm going to go in here, click insert section, add single chainage, and I'm going to get this very, very close to the end, very close. And then click OK. So an extra section will have gone in there. I'm going to just rebuild all models, just because I want to make sure that my model builder model here gets rebuilt with it. And as soon as you do that, because there is a section very close to the end, it's able to undertake that surface resolve for you. So it's basically the little trick there to get that to appear. We're going to just do a couple of other things. We're going to be changing the template, which I think is quite important. We want to be able to change the template on the design and see the ramifications of that in the Subgrade Model Manager. So we're going to head up to the template here, and we're going to add an extra layer of subgrade. Now, to be honest with you, I've already shown you, just using the emit tools, how you can fix up what layers you want in and what layers you want out. But I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to right click this time, edit section, which is what I wanted to do the first time. By the way, if you want to have something modeled, but you don't want to put layers of subgrade, but you do want to have the section being used for the purposes of your subgrade model, for example, this here, just come in and put a 0, don't blanket, put 0 thickness subgrade, and that will be used for the bottom of your subgrade surface. So if you did want this to be added, 0 thickness, okay? Now I'm just simply going to add in half a meter of infill here and apply and exit. Okay, that's gone in. We're going to click OK. Now, just clicking on the refresh button here will not, he says, as he just hits refresh, doesn't update. Okay, it doesn't reread that template model. What you need to do is to come to the tools button here and say compute section style. So what this says is, hey, I have a style that I used at the start. I want the software to go and reread all my templates. And if there is something on there which is new only, go to that, or basically use that. It will not override anything you have done already in respect of edits. We're very cautious of making sure that this button here only impacts something that's new on your model, not anything you've already created. We're going to say yes. Okay, all right, so done a pretty good job there. Yes, there's a layer that we need to get rid of, and yes, there's additional bits and pieces in here we need to remove. So let's go and do that. What we'll do first of all is we'll get rid of this linear break line. And when I say get rid of, I mean omit it from the design. So I'm going to say, yes, you do not need to be there, and apply. So that's removed that. I am still getting this layer here being added in, and we literally at the very start got rid of that layer by clicking on the sectional break line. Layer 3, yep, we don't want layer 3, we've got layer 4 in there now. Omit the bottom, and this time apply over the entire chainage range of my string. And that user break line is still connected to that original edge, which is why it's still being drawn. So what we might do is go to user break lines on, I think it's going to be an omitted break line, which is this one here. User break lines, and we're actually going to, by the way, I should have said this, if you want to remove the user break line, select the row just over here, and then just hit delete on your keyboard. Okay, click OK. So there's the user break line gone. Inadvertently sort of put myself in a bit of a box there, because that user break line was associated with something which was now omitted. So it's just worth paying attention to what's going on with your model there. So now, yes, I've got this rather large step going on, okay, but that's exactly as intended. I've got my extra layer of subgrade in, I've come in and I've recomputed the section style, which looks for any new layers of subgrade. If something was not quite right, we know that we can use the sectional break line editor to left click and omit over a single section or over a range. The section styles is where all of that's controlled and how this is set up. There is a video on our YouTube channel which unpacks this in more depth, but as I've already explained, there is one column I need to mention in here, but as I've explained, what we found is that most users don't actually come into here. What they found is that most of what happens automatically in the Subgrade Model Manager is enough for them to then start to go in and manually build and override what they want with most of the hard work done. You can see how easy it is to actually get the hang of it. One thing I will say though is that when we output 3D polylines, the 3D polylines will go onto this particular layer, and we'll talk about that in a second. So as far as actual editing goes, there's not really much more to show you. The intention was to kind of get over the line how the sectional break line editing works, the linear break line editing works, how to apply a surface resolve, how to apply a user break line, and then use the split functionality. And then what happens if I add a new layer of subgrade to my template and I decide that I need that particular layer to be modeled to, okay, which is what we've got here. Now, I guess it leads me on to, I'll just close down the linear break line editor. Leads me on to sort of the other functions that you can use in here. As I've already explained, and as we'll see in tool space, we have under CSD surfaces a subgrade surface, which is found with an SUB prefix. And if I right click on there, I can go to Surface Manager and I can apply all the style changes that I want to in there. You can also, in addition to the boundary retraction, apply edits. So if you wanted to reduce the amount of triangulation that was, say, for example, going through here and here, you could remove that from your model entirely. We'll pop over to the, well, I think we've done tools, the view. Again, this is quite a neat little tool. So this will allow you to view, wow, that's There's quite a list of changes. I don't know if we're going to be using it. No, we're not. We'll leave the camera view out of there, I think, at the moment. We'll pop to the import. Now, import allows you to show any pipe networks that you have. And again, if you have a look at the import-export YouTube video, we talk about how you can bring in your civil site design pipe networks and display them in this environment, which is very helpful. In some respects, could be more helpful than Model Viewer, because at the end of the day, the other side of your design is incredibly important. You can also bring in your CAD drawings. If they happen to have 3D information in them, they will be elevated to that elevation. If you've got a 2D CAD drawing, you're literally going to be seeing that at 0. So there might not be huge value in doing that, but if you've got 3D drawings that you want to XREF in, or bring in, sorry, and load in, you can do that. Lastly, the export. So if you don't know, you can do this on Model Viewer. Model Viewer has an export function where you can export things like point cloud file, PDF, DWG, DXF, and even our standalone. So if you didn't know, you can do that, and you can do that with this file as well. So 3D PDF could be of use. The bit that I'm going to focus on is really the 3 options here, which are the output polylines, which I'm actually going to click on now. There is no prompt to say that this has happened, which has caught me out. But when you left click on the drawing, or in the drawing, we'll just see there's our layer. And there's our 3D polylines being displayed. So you can basically export those, do what you want with them basically, but they're yours. And every time you click on the output polylines, you will get new ones being drawn. So just be aware of that. You can end up with multiple copies of 3D polylines. So obviously use this with care. Exporting an IFC file, which you can, again, do in Model Viewer. We're going to click on Export Roads with Parking. I'm not going to set the origin. We're just simply going to leave this as it is. Click on Export, and I've already got one called Roads and Parking. We'll call this Roads with Parking, just to be different, and then click on Save. And we'll get prompted to say that, yep, that's happened. Click OK. And I've now got a program called BIM Vision, which is completely free. So if you are creating IFC files, or or in receipt of an IFC file and need to view it, then BIM Vision, if you Google that, you can get a free download, and this is a free viewer. So I'm going to go and open here, Roads with Parking, click on Open, and I'm just going to be zooming in here so we can begin to left click and select elements that we want to see. So you can see here the material that's being applied, or the render. Think of this as the render material that's being applied to that particular infill has come up as topsoil. But basically, this is quite a neat little, if you haven't come across it, it's a very neat little tool to view and visualize and look at IFC files. So I just wanted to show you that this can be done. And as I said, this is also available in Model Viewer. And lastly, the export of a civil 3D surface. Now, in a soon to be released update, this will have a tweak. The problem is, unfortunately, that we do not prefix this particular button, this Civil 3D surface, with Civil 3D. So what I've now just done is I've got 2 surfaces in the drawing. If you're a Civil 3D user, you'll be aware of this. You can't have a Civil Site Design surface and a Civil 3D surface with the same name. So I'm showing you this as much as anything to say, just be aware that you need to, as soon as you run this, immediately rename the surface and to whatever you want. As long as it's got a different name, it doesn't matter, but you need to rename it. I'm putting Civil 3D in front of it. If for whatever reason you don't run that command, you can simply head over to the CSD surfaces and go output Civil 3D surface. You could cherry pick it in here, and then it will output and add the appropriate prefix on for you. So it's just that one button, which I wanted to highlight. I'm going to actually delete that Civil 3D surface. It doesn't need to be there. Okay, now I've been cautious of running over time with this particular webinar, but I wanted to sort of get it to a point where if there was time for some questions and discussion points, we could address them. So I'm sort of going to leave it there. I'm hoping that really what I've shown you today is you know, there's a lot you can do with it without much effort. But yeah, sorry, Todd.
So yes, there is one question which I did flag as answering live, and you kind of did answer it halfway through the session. I just wanted to clarify. The question was about, once you've made changes to your subgrade model, would it be shown on the cross-section? So Jonathan very early on showed the cross-section view where he projected the surface. So the answer is yes. If you're talking about cross-section plots, then you would need to show the subgrade surface model as a extra surface model on the cross-section plotting. So that was probably the other half of that answer that I want to give. So yeah, yes, the answer is yes. The result of a subgrade model is a surface, and that surface can be shown cross-section plotting on your cross-section views. It's basically whatever you can do with the surface, you can do with it. So Jonathan's going right through it right now, but
yeah, I'm just
hopefully that answers that one. There's a couple more questions come in. This one, can you compute volumes in an editor, or do you do that in Civil 3D? Okay, so I'm assuming that's a question between the volumes between the subgrade surface and perhaps the design surface to get the bulk earthworks or something like that. Answer is very much you can do that in the software. That is just the subgrade, sorry, the surface tool. So if you convert the subgrade surface to a Civil 3D surface, you can do it that way. Or in CSD, you can do it using the CSD surface comparison. Essentially, you need to have the surfaces in the same world. So if it's a Civil 3D target surface, then you need a Civil 3D resultant surface. If it's a CSD target surface, then you need a CSD resultant surface. Just get them both in the same world. And then the computations is very much can happen. It's essentially a terrain model to terrain model comparison.
Yeah, I should have covered that actually. Volumes was kind of a part of the discussion at the very start, and I completely neglected to create a volume surface with Civil 3D. But yeah, you've got a surface at the end of the day. That's what the result is, and you can then choose to do what you want with it. Yep.
Cool. And then the last question is from someone in WA. And I think it was one of the questions I'd already started answering about when you do stuff behind the back of curb. And this one's about, will it triangulate up to the curb bottom and then back down to the road extension based on the webinar? Yes, but it can be omitted. So it looks like they answered the question themselves. So yes, so essentially, I think the answer to that question is anything you create in your subgrade definition on your templates is created as sectional and linear breaklines in the subgrade models. And then you can choose to omit and extend to surface or resolve to surface, sorry, or use it breaklines and all that sort of stuff. So it's essentially a replication of what you make in that subgrade model. So in that, the subgrade definition becomes the subgrade model. Essentially, it's just another method of making strings, really. The only thing we could probably mention, and you did mention it, Jonathan, but maybe at least show them where it is, the subgrade variations.
Very good. Yes.
Just to mention where they can actually do other manipulations if they really.
I'm not sure we've got it in tool space at the moment. I'll just have a quick look.
Don't recall.
Not yet.
In the roads tab.
Remember, guys, if you've got any feedback, tell us down here. Feedback survey. So if there's something you want in there, tell us. Let's go to the rows tab, and it would be under subgrade editor, I think is what we're calling it. Here we go. So this will allow us to go in and override. Go add. Override and add additional layers of subgrade and tweak the subgrade effectively. Yeah, as we've said, it's a variation override over your particular template on your particular string.
So this will actually impact your cross-section view. So you'll see it there. You're basically modifying the yellow lines in these windows. You're showing the surface that doesn't exist.
Yes. Let's get rid of that. There we go.
So yeah, you're essentially manipulating those yellow lines over a region. It doesn't have to be the full length of a string. It can be just parts, change range. And then when you make those changes, they impact your subgrade model. So to answer Terry's question, yes, that's how you do it. You can do all weird and wonderful combinations of whatever you need to do. So yeah. Hopefully that answers everything.
Nice little segue into this particular feature because I don't think we've shown it off.
No, we haven't. We haven't. But
it's great. So, it's really good just to know that you don't have to be creating lots of different templates with lots of different subgrades. You've got the one template and you can go in and tell it to do all sorts of different things over that particular change range. So yeah, very good feature.
Oh, there's another question just come in. Is there a way to modify the subbase thickness based on an existing pavement overlay and full depth pavement being used? Existing road being widened from 3 to 3.5 meters and reconstructed with existing pavement is used as part of the subgrade and the distance varies due to existing road.
I don't know if that's something we'll address in this webinar, only because we're sort of focusing on this. I mean, you can. So if it's to do with advanced subgrade controls, is that what?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm just trying to read the question. Is there a way to modify the subgrade base thicknesses based on existing pavement overlay and full? Yes, I'm assuming this is probably a combination of this stuff also combined with potentially the insert label with maintaining the crossfall, where you can do a subgrade switch, like the reconstruction type techniques. I think that's related to that, which is not quite this session, but if I'm understanding the question correctly, then the answer is probably yes, but it's not explicitly something to do with this. But yes, you can change subgrade conditions across a section.
Yeah, and by the way, the advanced subgrade options do come across into the subgrade editor as well. So if you are matching onto a surface, you will see that bottom layer matching onto the surface in the Subgrade Model Manager. So everything comes across.
Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Jonathan, for as usual, always exemplary presentation.
Pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for attendance. And yeah,